Chinese maker Leapmotor bounds into the UK market with this extraordinarily well-priced D-segment upper mid-size crossover, the C10, tested in this case as a full EV. The money being asked here would normally get you something smaller and feebler of range, and there's plenty of technology and lots of equipment as standard too. You can see why European conglomerate Stellantis decided to part-own the Leapmotor brand.
The Leapmotor C10. This mid-sized EV crossover is an unfamiliar contender, but competes with value pricing in a familiar genre backed by a familiar brand. Here, we'll take a closer look. Another month, another new Chinese EV maker. Except that this one, Leapmotor, is a bit different, part owned by the Stellantis group conglomerate that has so many brands in Europe. Stellantis knows that it'll take more than trade tariffs to hold back the invasion of Chinese automakers into Western markets, so thought a clever approach would be to buy into one, a cool 11.5 billion euro stake that's given them 20% of the business, which also gives the group access into some pretty useful EV technology, as we'll see. The result of all this is Leapmotor International, which launched in Europe with two electric models, the T03 small runabout, and our subject here, the C10, a mid-sized EV crossover aimed at the Tesla Model Y D segment. Both are being sold at existing Stellantis dealerships around the UK, and both undercut European and Chinese rivals substantially on price. So here, to some extent, we have the Chinese taking on the Chinese. Let battle commence. You can find out more about this kind of model by downloading the Car and Driving app. And if your interest is specifically in this Leapmotor C10, you'll need to stay with us for the industry's most comprehensive review, the Car and Driving Road Test. When it comes to EV powertrain development, an area where the Chinese brands have certainly stolen a march over Western ones is when it comes to what's called cell-to-chassis technology. With this, rather than a big battery being plonked on top of a chassis, the battery pack becomes integrated to the chassis of the car, which is a win-win scenario because this improves rigidity, enhances interior space, and dials up the drive dynamics. Like its Oriental rival BYD, Leapmotor claims to have pioneered this development. Whoever actually did, the Western brands are desperate for this tech. You'll see it on future Teslas, and it was probably the main reason that Stellantis paid so much for its stake in the Leapmotor business. All of which explains why this C10 shares absolutely none of its engineering with anything the Stellantis group has ever marketed before. Certainly not this car's 69.9 kilowatt-hour battery, the only one on offer, which Leapmotor makes almost entirely itself and seems very proud of, despite the fact that its potential 263-mile drive range figure is quite unremarkable by class standards. Or at least that's what it offers in this EV model. As we filmed, Leapmotor was preparing to launch an alternative C10 variant you might like rather more, a range extender or REEV version that matches a battery to a 218 brake horsepower e-motor and can more than double its electric counterpart's range to over 590 miles. It's the pure EV variant though that's our focus here. Just a single version is on offer, with a rear-mounted permanent magnet synchronous motor developing 215 bhp. Acceleration is intentionally linear, so the car actually doesn't feel anything like as fast as the figures suggest it is. 62 miles an hour takes 7.5 seconds en route to the usual very modest EV maximum, in this case 106 miles an hour. The range extender model is a second slower, but shares this EV's 320 Nm torque figure, which allows for decent mid-range punch. Or at least there is in the more urgent of the provided drive modes, Sport. But with this EV variant's relatively restricted range figure in mind, you won't want to be using that setting too frequently. And in the other two main modes, Comfort and of course particularly in Eco, the C10 feels far less eager. Within the modes menu, you can also select Custom, which allows you to set up powertrain, steering, and brake regen settings as a one-touch option. Talking of brake regen, there are 4 levels of that provided: low, standard, high, or one pedal. The latter rather annoyingly requiring you to park up first before it will activate. Hopefully that'll be fixed at the midterm update. What you don't have to activate is the useful freewheeling function that automatically disengages the drive motor on flat or downhill sections of road where it isn't needed. We're reasonably certain that in the hands of an experienced manufacturer, the rigid platform and low centre of gravity enabled by the cell-to-chassis technology in play here could create a really excellent handling EV of this size. But Leapmotor isn't an experienced manufacturer, and to be frank, that shows in this C10's drive dynamics, despite the fact that Stellantis apparently loaned the brand some Maserati engineers to help tune this car for Europe. Contrary to the promises of the cell-to-chassis tech, there's plenty of body roll through the corners, mainly due to a very comfort-orientated suspension setup, which would be fine if such suppleness led the C10 to be as floaty over urban bumps as it is at speed through fast corners. But it doesn't, and you'll feel potholes and speed bumps more than you ought to. Like most Chinese cars, the steering's almost completely devoid of feedback, whichever of its three provided modes, comfort, standard or sport, is chosen. It's very light indeed, unless you're in sport, so you'll never feel particularly confident about throwing the car around, should you have to, but perhaps that's just as well. Through the twisty stuff, you're likely to feel this car's considerable curb weight, 1,980 kilos. That's an issue common, of course, to all contenders in this class, but some of them manage to conceal the feeling of bulk better than this. You could live with that. What's much harder to live with is the intrusive ADAS safety tech, which is so intrusive that unless you turn off lane keeping assistance, the overspeed warning and driver monitoring before each journey, not a simple process, the car is almost undrivable. Leapmotor is said to be working on solutions for this. Whoever signed the car off for sale in this state should be looking for alternative employment. What else? Well, you might not like the rather oversensitive brakes, but you should at least appreciate reasonable levels of journeying hush, thanks to copious levels of soundproofing and an acoustic windscreen. At a cruise, refinement's slightly affected by wind noise and a bit of motor whine, but overall, this is one of the more refined cars in its class on the highway. And in town, the turning circle's tight and there's great all-round visibility, so you'd find this to be a good commuting appliance. The price here suggests quite a compact SUV, but in the metal, the C10 is revealed as a much bigger D-segment one. Refreshingly, no attempts being made to deliver any sort of swept-back silhouette of the kind currently fashionable in this segment. But with its heavily glazed, smoothed-off surfaces, this Leapmotor still manages to be very aerodynamically efficient. Let's give you some size perspective here. A typical electric SUV at this Leapmotor's price point, say a Hyundai Kona Electric or a Kia EV3, is around 4.3 metres long. Choose one in the next pricier segment up, say a VW ID4 or a Ford Explorer, and you'll get a car around 4.5 metres long. This C10 measures in at 4,739mm in length, so the metal for money argument here is as strong as the standard provision of these big 20-inch alloy wheels suggests the equipment tally will be. The three parallel lines that are sculpted into this side panel work are supposed to create a strong impression of strength and stability. And this little pod on each front wing houses just one of the many cameras that run the car's multiple ADAS systems. Despite the inclusion of roof rails, there's not much attempt at SUV-ness. The squared-off wheel arches lack the usual cladding, and the ride height is a very un-SUV-like 180mm. The front styling's neat but unremarkable, below the clamshell bonnet line set off by what Leapmotor rather unappealingly calls a dumbbell-shaped light bar. There are air curtain slots at either end of the bumper. At the back, there's a further full-width light bar above the spaced-out Leapmotor lettering on the tailgate. Finishing touches include low horizontal reflectors and a subtle roof spoiler, just beyond which is a shark fin antenna. But as usual, what's more important is what you can't see. This C10's innovative cell-to-body construction, which makes the battery part of the floor structure, delivers exceptional torsional rigidity. Leapmotor rates it at 42,500 Newton meters per degrees. OK, time to unlock the car and take a look inside, which on first acquaintance with this car might prompt a little bit of head scratching because there's no key fob, and the rather cheap-feeling plastic card you get instead must be tapped not conventionally on the B-pillar or the door handle, but in exactly the right place on the door mirror housing. Clout that on a city street and you might find yourself locked out. Once inside, if you think it's all very Tesla-like, then Leapmotor will be pleased because that was clearly the designer's intention, which means a very minimalist vibe with a concealed full-width electric air vent and the kind of general absence of physical switchgear that any Western customer clinic would have told the Chinese makers' designers that European buyers are getting increasingly fed up with. There's even more of a homage to Tesla around the steering wheel. The gear selector stalk, that American brand, is now abandoned for its products, has found a home here, and the roller buttons on the spokes are also near identical to those you'd find on a Musk motor. This 14-inch central touchscreen will feel familiar to Model 3 and Model Y owners too, though it's slightly smaller than the one Tesla provides. But just as full of menus and submenus that you'll have to quickly get to grips with because they control all sorts of essential functions. Not only the climate system, the drive modes and the brake regen functions, but also stuff like side mirror adjustment and seat heating and cooling. At least you don't have to use it to open the glove box. This monitor runs on a Qualcomm Snapdragon chip and its bottom section has permanently displaying climate functions, above which are shortcut boxes for things like EV functions, audio and navigation. Most of the screen though is taken up with something that's of no use at all, except to soothe you if you find all this cabin minimalism a little stressful. Leapmotor's choice of background wallpaper. Scroll left or right for 14 different images. Natural voice control is included, though we haven't found it very intuitive, and you get 4G in-car Wi-Fi, though disappointingly the Apple CarPlay and Android Auto phone mirroring systems that many customers will be looking for are completely absent. The brand hasn't followed the current trend for joining the infotainment and drive dial monitors together, so the instrument info you view through the strangely shaped steering wheel is covered off by a separate 10.25-inch screen. Speed, gear selection and the prevailing speed limit are displayed over to the left, while on the right you can bring up a box with nav, audio and trip data info. Range, drive mode, external temperature and time are displayed in rather small graphics along the display's bottom frame. What else? Well, there's a light and airy feel thanks to the enormous 2.1 square metres standard panoramic glass roof, and fit and finish seems quite good. The quality of the Okotex certified silicone trimmed faux leather upholstery doesn't. Presumably Chinese buyers have forgotten what real hide feels like. And on that subject, it's nice that the front seats have standard heating and ventilation and feature 7 padding layers of different density. But it's really disappointing that they lack lumbar support in a car of this price. We quite liked this scratchy suede-like fabric on top of the doors, and you might well appreciate some of the centre screen's clever tech touches. Nap offers a choice of soothing centre screen themes with sounds and images. We're not quite sure why you'd want drizzling. Scenarios gives you a guard mode which keeps the climate system on to cool or warm the car should you need to leave it for short periods, and a special cleaning mode for car washes. There's also a 256 colour intelligent ambient lighting system and an excellent standard fit 12-speaker 840 watt sound system featuring an equaliser which allows the user to create their own favourite sound effects via 4 audio modes: enjoy, surround, theatre and dynamic. It's quite a practical cabin with 10 storage areas here at the front. This twin-level centre console has a deep lidded box in its upper part and a less useful shallow area in its lower part that features both USB-A and C ports. There are big door bins, a reasonably sized glove box and central cup holders that should be lidded but sadly aren't, alongside a wireless charging mat which won't be much use for your handset all the time you're using it for activation of this NFC starter card, which you'll have to place there unless you fully activate the Leapmotor app. This overhead button for one-touch retraction of all the windows is a useful touch, and all-round visibility is excellent. You may or may not be convinced by all of this. If not, let's take you to a part of this car that might very well sell it to you: the rear seat. This is where that extra body length advantage over similarly priced contenders in this class really pays off. There's a vast amount more space for legs and knees than almost any car we can think of under £45,000, with plenty of room to slide your feet below the seat in front and an airy feel emphasised by the big panoramic roof we mentioned earlier. Though you might feel that you'd be prepared to sacrifice some of that in return for the kind of seat sliding or backrest reclining functions that some competitors offer, but which are missing here. Still, there's the usual flat EV floor, so a third middle-seated adult could fit in without too much of a squash, if need be. Headroom's impressive as well. 10 more storage compartments feature back here, including decent door bins and seat back pockets, but Leapmotor's rather strangely forgotten to put cup holders into the armrest, possibly because there's access to 2 of these at the back end of the centre console. There's just a single air vent, but you get both USB-A and C ports, big rear quarter-light windows, reading lights in each grab handle, Isofix mounting points, and each door card features a neat little speaker. Unfortunately, when the time comes to investigate the luggage bay, accessed by the standard powered tailgate, it turns out that there's a price to pay for all this rear seat space. You may well find this EV model's cargo area's 435 litre capacity to be enough, even though it's about 150 litres less than you'd get, say, in a rival Skoda Enyaq. But it's hard not to be disappointed by the fact that this is less than you'll find from the much smaller 4.3 metre long SUVs we mentioned earlier. With the RE EV range extender model, boot space falls to 400 litres. This is at least a very usable space with a left-hand recess featuring a deep cubby that makes it easier to get awkward items like pushchairs in, and a 2-piece luggage board that has separated compartments beneath. There are bag hooks either side and a light on the left, but Leapmotor hasn't thought to provide either a ski hatch or a convenient 40-20-40 rear seatback split. So with the rear seat in use, longer items like skis will have to go on the roof. There are no cargo sidewall catches for flattening the rear backrest either, but at least it does go completely flat, freeing up 1,410 litres. It's 1,375 in the RE EV range extender version. Only this EV variant gets a further 34 litres of storage space beneath the bonnet, useful for the charging leads. From launch and at the time of this test in summer 2025, prices started from £36,500 for the full EV version of the C10 that we're trying here. The RE EV range extender version hadn't yet been launched as we filmed, but we don't expect it to be priced too much differently from this EV. Either way, there's just one fully stacked standard of trim. At the time of this test, there were 44 Leapmotor dealers in the UK, all of them familiar local garages stocking other Stellantis Group brands. The marque expects to increase that number to around 80 dealerships by the end of 2025, so you shouldn't ever be too far from one. The way Leapmotor tells it, this EV model's asking price really is very good value. The brand points out that for the price of quite a small EV crossover, say a Hyundai Kona Electric or a Kia EV3, you're getting here a considerably bigger one. Larger, in fact, than key EV crossovers in the next segment up, like Volkswagen's ID4 or Ford's Explorer, which tend to start at around £40,000 and would cost around £45,000 if spec'd to the level that you'd get as standard with the C10. We're not entirely sure that this argument fully stands up to scrutiny, though. For a start, Though in sheer dimensions, this Leapmotor is certainly quite a lot bigger than similarly priced electric SUVs, it doesn't use that space particularly well. For instance, both the aforementioned Hyundai Kona Electric and the Kia EV3 will give you a bigger boot. We should also point out that this C10 isn't the only car offering more space for less money in this class. Renault's Scenic E-Tech Electric has been championing this proposition since 2023 and has a starting price very similar to that of a C10. Plus, it offers more boot space and much more driving range. The downside of that Renault is that you'd have to spend between £5,000 and £7,000 more to match the standard equipment fitted to this Leapmotor. If you're the sort of person prepared to consider a Leapmotor product, then you might well have been looking at some of the other newly launched Chinese manufacturers. Arguably, the closest Chinese brand product to this one is another car you probably won't have heard of, the Skywell BE11, which costs much the same, but is quite a lot less sophisticated. As for Chinese makers you're more likely to have heard of, at a BYD showroom, C10 money will only get you a sparsely equipped version of the much smaller Atto 3, while Omoda charges near on C10 money for the top version of its much smaller E5. Xiaopeng's G6 is at least similarly sized to this C10, but costs from around £40,000 in its most basic guise. If you're looking at more common non-Chinese segment choices alongside this C10, we'll tell you that a similarly sized Tesla Model Y costs from around £46,000. Enough with the comparisons, you've probably now got the idea. Namely that this car is very good value as long as you're realistic about what that money is actually buying you. As we've been saying, a fundamental part of that buying proposition lies with the heavily stacked standard of spec. So let's take a closer look at that now. It's a pity that the UK is only offered this car with the brand's plusher design level of trim. Other markets also get a perfectly well-equipped base style spec level that allows the car to be priced against much smaller super mini based SUVs. And obviously then its value proposition looks even better. But it's still an impressive proposition with this design spec level. This gets you large 20-inch Trident alloy wheels, automatic LED headlamps, animated LED tail lamps, rear parking sensors, power folding mirrors, rear privacy glass, a powered tailgate, automatic wipers, and a heat pump. Drive stuff includes 4 driving modes, 3 steering modes, 3 level regenerative braking, and adaptive cruise control. Plus, there's the Leapmotor app, via which you can check your vehicle status and location, remotely lock or unlock it, or schedule charging. Inside this C10, there's a 360-degree parking camera, a 10.25-inch LCD instrument cluster, 2-zone automatic air conditioning, steering wheel heating, an air quality monitor, Architect's silicone-trimmed faux leather upholstery, and powered adjustment heating and ventilation for the front seats. You also get a panoramic glass roof with a powered blind, ambient lighting, and a wireless phone charger. Media stuff includes a 14.6-inch central touchscreen with online navigation, a 12-speaker audio system, voice control, online music, over-the-air updates, and in-vehicle Wi-Fi, plus 2 USB and 2 USB-C ports. But disappointingly, you don't get either Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. There aren't really any extra cost options, but you will have to pay your dealer £700 extra for your choice of paint colour if you don't choose the only standard shade, this rather nice glazed green. On to safety, considerably aided in this case by the platform's exceptionally rigid cell-to-body construction. As this model's 5-star Euro NCAP rating suggests, there's also a very complete level of safety spec based around 12 high-precision sensors. The C10 safety portfolio includes use of a front monocular camera, 4 surround view cameras, a driver fatigue monitoring camera, 2mm wave radars and 4 ultrasonic radars. All very impressive, but as we told you in our driving section, the systems that all of this technology enables haven't been properly developed for user friendliness. In fact, it's actually hard to drive this car for more than about 10 minutes without being irritatingly disturbed by one of them. As we remarked when testing the company's smaller T 03 model, there's not a lot of point in Leapmotor stacking its cars out with sophisticated safety systems if the first thing that owners are going to want to do before they set off is to try and turn them off. Even that's more awkward to do than it should be. The brand says it should be possible to fix some of these issues via over-the-air updates. For their sake, we hope that's true. But anyway, let's cover off what you get here, which earned this C10 a strong 89% Euro NCAP score for adult occupancy protection, 85% for child occupant protection, and a decent 76% in the safety assist category. The camera safety kit tally is based around no fewer than 17 different ADS features, including front collision warning with autonomous emergency braking, plus lane keep assist and lane departure warning. There's also lane centering control, blind spot detection, rear collision warning, and rear cross traffic alert with rear cross traffic brake. Drive assist features include intelligent speed assist and a traffic jam assist function that'll virtually drive the car for you in low speed urban queues. There's also a driver drowsiness and attention warning, a tyre pressure monitoring system, a side collision sensor, and a multi-collision braking system that in the event of an impact will automatically brake the car so that it's less likely to go on and hit something else. Also included are 2 rear seat ISOFIX child seat fastenings and the usual front side and curtain airbags, plus a far side airbag, all linked to an SOS call facility that'll inform the emergency services of your GPS location should any of the bags ever inflate. There's also what Leapmotor calls life detection, which advises you if you're about to leave the car when there's someone, say a strapped-in child, still in it. We gave you the EV mileage figure in our driving section, 263 miles, providing you keep the car in its most frugal eco-drive mode. Obviously, the prodigious 1,980 kilogram curb weight takes its toll here, though you do at least get a standard heat pump to maintain range in cold weather. The centre screen's charging section can display your remaining battery mileage either as standard range or dynamic range, the latter based on changing driving conditions. But is the WLTP figure we quoted really good enough by segment standards? Well, for class comparison, that range figure is better than a base 52 kilowatt-hour Volkswagen ID4, which manages 222 miles, or a base 63 kilowatt-hour Nissan Ariya, which manages 250 miles. And this C10's EV range is about the same as a base 59 kilowatt-hour Skoda Enyaq 60, which manages 268 miles, or a base 66 kilowatt-hour Xiaopeng G6, which manages 270 miles. Which is all well and good, but we can't gloss over the fact that this C10 EV model's driving range is still way off the top class standard. An entry-level 63 kilowatt-hour rear-wheel drive Tesla Model Y, for instance, manages up to 311 miles. It's also worth pointing out that a base spec Renault Scenic E-Tech Electric, which is similarly priced to a C10, has a much larger 87 kilowatt-hour battery that will take you a substantial 381 miles between charges. Still, if driving range is an issue, your Leapmotor dealer will point you towards the alternative range extender C10 REEV model. As we told you in our driving section, this variant matches this EV model's battery to a 218 bhp e-motor and can more than double its electric counterpart's range to over 590 miles. Driving range, though, isn't the area where you'll really find the major catch that you might have been waiting to discover within this car's buying proposition. For some potential owners, that's more likely to lie in the available DC public charging speed. It's a feeble 84 kilowatts, which really isn't good enough. To give you some class perspective, a Skoda Enyaq 60 charges at 165 kilowatts, something like the sector norm. But even that car's embarrassed by the way that a Tesla Model Y powers at up to 250 kilowatts, or a Kia EV6 charges at up to 350 kilowatts. All of this means that DC public charging with this Leapmotor takes longer than the norm, though not that much longer. A 10 to 80% DC public charge of this C10 needs around 40 minutes. That's nearly twice as long as a Model Y. A 30 to 80% DC charge would be 30 minutes. Still, if all you do most of the time is charge this car from home, that might not matter much. AC charging from a 7.4 kilowatt wall box takes around 10 hours for full replenishment, though you can reduce that to 6.1 hours if you only need to charge from 30 to 80%. If you have a 3-phase supply and can charge at 11 kilowatts, as the C10 does allow you to, the full replenishment time will be 6 hours and 21 minutes. So you can monitor all of this. There's a charging and efficiency shortcut on the centre screen, and there's also a last charge section in that monitor's useful vehicle status section, which also briefs you on maintenance info and current trip data. You can, of course, also manage charging via the Leapmotor app. We mentioned maintenance. That should be straightforward thanks to the brand's network of UK Stellantis dealerships. Service intervals for the C10 are every 12 months or 12,427 miles. That's 20,000 kilometres. A common headache with new brands, particularly Chinese ones, entering our market is parts supply, which means when something breaks, you do have to wait ages to get it fixed. But not here, because Leapmotor makes almost everything for this car itself, including virtually all of the battery. The brand doesn't have to source parts from outside suppliers and says that the UK dealer network already has ready access to virtually every C10 part you might need. Good to know. What else? Well, insurance costs may erode some of that money you saved up front because the C10 EV sits up in insurance group 41, pretty high for an electric family SUV. To give you a point of comparison, a base Skoda Enyaq starts at group 27 and a base Renault Scenic E-Tech electric starts at group 28. At least, a little surprisingly, depreciation is expected to be reasonable, about 50% after 3 years and 36,000 miles. It's also worth pointing out that the majority of other cars in this segment, when equipped to the level of a C10, will take you over the £40,000 price threshold, which will see you having to pay the government's expensive vehicle supplement. No such issues for a Leapmotor customer. As with all EVs, you now have to pay vehicle excise duty at £195 annually, but you'll save with benefit in kind tax rated at 3%, as we filmed in the 2025-26 tax year. The London congestion charge these days applies to EVs, but unlike with combustion models, there are at least no London ULEZ zone charges to pay. So, to borrow the brand's marketing slogan, should you take a leap and try a C10? Well, the main reason why you might is value-led. Here's an upper mid-sized Tesla Model Y-shaped D-segment EV crossover for pretty much the price of a much smaller C-segment one, and with much more standard equipment than you'll find with cars in either category, unless you pay an awful lot more for them. That is a strong proposition. But perhaps not an irresistible one. You might not be immediately taken with the forgettable looks, the vanilla driving dynamics, and the fact that so many interior functions have to be screen-based. And take it from us, the many standard ADAS camera safety functions will quickly irritate. Still, for the price being asked here, you might be prepared to make a few compromises. And with the Stellantis brand backing, there's little of the fear factor that you might usually have when buying into an unknown Chinese brand. In summary, the C10 is the kind of car the European makers feared the Chinese might try to flood our market with. Does it change things that the car is, in this case, part European owned? Well, Stellantis obviously thinks so. It'll be interesting to see if customers agree.